Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive, into the life of a guy. Pretty much everyone's heard of Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs, that's right.
But we're not just gonna rehash, the same old iPhone stories and the whole turtleneck thing. Everyone knows all that. We're really going deep here, using the biography just called, Steve Jobs.
Let's do the one.
Yeah, we're gonna try to get, to those lesser known parts of his life. And, really get inside his head. Like, what made this guy tick?
Yeah, because Steve Jobs' story, it's not, just another Silicon Valley success story. It's deeper than that. It's about ambition, and what happens when you just refuse to give up. And it's about how failure can sometimes, lead to incredible innovation. We're going to be exploring, all these different sides of him and hopefully revealing a much more complex and, honestly, much more interesting picture of him. Than the one we usually see.
Okay, so let's start, back at the beginning. So he was born in 55, San Francisco. But I think his story really starts, in his dad's garage.
Yeah.
Surrounded by electronics.
Yeah, the classic garage startup.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So even as a kid, Jobs was fascinated by how things worked. Taking things apart, putting them back together.
A tinkerer.
A total tinkerer. And that really set the stage for everything that came later.
Yeah, that hands-on experience, it's really where it all began. It wasn't, just about learning the technical stuff. It was more about, developing a sense of design and intuition for, what works and what doesn't. You can't learn that from a book.
No, you can't. And then there's the whole thing with him dropping out of Reed College. A lot of people hear that and they're like, wait, he what?
Dropped out of college.
Yeah. But I kind of get it.
Yeah, it might seem like he was, rejecting the whole idea of education, but I think it was more about him wanting to learn things his own way. He was always, learning new things all the time, but he wanted to follow his own path, explore the things that, really got him excited. And that independent streak, that's what led him to start Apple with Wozniak when he was just 21.
21. That's crazy. I was just trying to figure out, how to do laundry at that age. And these guys are building computers in a garage. And their very first computer, the Apple, it was more than just a computer, It was like a statement.
Yeah, it was like this vision of what personal computing could be.
We hear people say all the time that the Apple democratized computing.
Right.
But what does that actually mean?
Well, think about it. Back then, in 1976, computers were these huge, expensive machines. Mostly you'd only find them in universities or, government labs.
For sure.
But the Apple, it was different, it was small, it looked cool, and this is important. It was something people could actually afford.
Right. For
the first time, regular people, they could imagine having a computer in their own home.
Wow.
That was Jobs' vision, to give individuals that kind of power, to break down those barriers between people and technology.
It's kind of wild when you think about it.
Yeah.
Like that vision that started in a garage, it basically launched the whole digital revolution. But, we got to be honest here. Jobs was brilliant. But he was also really intense.
Oh, yeah.
Demanding. He wanted everything to be perfect.
And that could lead to some clashes.
Sure.
He was so passionate about making things amazing, but that sometimes meant, he wanted to control everything, every little detail. He had this very clear idea of what Apple should be. And he wasn't afraid to push people really hard to make that happen.
Right. And sometimes that pushing led to problems, Like things weren't always, totally smooth at Apple, even in those early days.
Yeah, there was definitely tension. And it all kind of came to a head in 1985 when Jobs was forced out of the company he started.
Whoa, hold on. Forced out?
Yeah.
That seems crazy. Like he was Apple.
It's a wild story, right?
What happened?
Well, it was complicated. Basically a power struggle between Jobs and the board of directors. They thought he was getting too difficult to work with, too controlling. They were worried that his style, never compromising, was actually hurting the company.
So basically the same things that made him successful early on.
Like his vision, his drive.
Yeah. They kind of ended up, backfiring.
Yep. Yeah. It's interesting how that happens sometimes. Even with the most brilliant people, there are these flaws. And sometimes those flaws are tied up with their strengths.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
It's amazing how, these big changes in someone's life can push them in directions they never expected. Like, for Jobs leaving Apple, that wasn't the end. It was actually, a whole new beginning.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because I think most people, if they got kicked out of their own company, they'd be pretty devastated. But Jobs didn't let that stop him. He went on to found NEC-ST, which was all about, these high-end computers. And then there's Pixar. Which is legendary. Toy Story, it basically changed animation forever.
Totally. And while NEC-ST, it didn't become this huge household name like Apple, it was definitely not a failure. It was more like a testing ground where Jobs could figure out, his leadership style. And he developed some really innovative technology there.
Okay, but how can we say NXT was a success if it didn't really achieve, what it set out to do, and it ended up getting bought by Apple? That's a good question. But I think we need to look beyond, just the numbers. The operating system they built at NXT, it was all about being elegant and easy to use. And that became the basis for, later Apple products, like the iMac and the iPhone. So in a way, NXT's DNA is part of why Apple became so successful.
Huh. So even when it seemed like he was failing, Jobs was actually setting the stage for his future wins. And speaking of wins, we can't forget about Pixar. Come on, who doesn't love Toy Story?
Pixar was more than just an animation studio. It was like this storytelling machine. And Jobs being there, it really helped him understand how to tell a story, how to create something that people would connect with emotionally. And those skills, being able to tell a story and make people feel something, that turned out to be super important when he went back to Apple.
So it's like all those separate things he did, NXT and Pixar, they were all part of, him getting back to Apple.
Exactly. And when he came back in '97, that was the start of one of the most incredible comebacks in business history. With him in charge, Apple released all these iconic products. They completely changed the tech world.
We're talking the iMac, the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Like all these innovations that change the way we live and work and interact with everything.
Every single one of those products, it showed Jobs' vision of, how technology should just fit seamlessly into our lives. He knew that technology wasn't just about, specs and features. It was about design. It was about how people actually used it.
Yeah.
And how people felt about their devices.
And it's interesting how that focus on storytelling, that he got from Pixar, it became a big part of how Apple marketed its products. Like, remember those iPod ads with the silhouettes dancing? With those bright colors?
Yeah.
They weren't just selling a music player. They were selling a feeling.
Exactly. And that ability to connect with people's emotions, to make them want something, to make them aspire to something, that was a huge part of why Apple was so successful under Jobs.
But his influence went beyond just products.
Yeah.
Like his Stanford commencement speech. With that message about connecting the dots and, embracing failure and living with intention, that speech still inspires people today.
That speech, it really shows, his philosophy of life, a philosophy that came from his own experiences, the good times and the bad times. He was telling those graduates to find what they're passionate about, to trust their gut, and to never forget what really matters to them.
And it's incredible how those themes, finding your purpose and going after it with everything you've got, how that resonates with so many people. It's like he tapped into this, universal human need to find meaning and to make a difference.
Yeah, you're right. And that's a big reason why people are still talking about him today. His story reminds us that one person with a vision and the determination to make it happen, they can actually change the world.
It's true. His story, it really does feel like a movie. Makes you wonder, though, like, if he were still around today, what would he be working on?
Oh, it's a great question.
Yeah, like what problems would he be trying to solve?
Well, given how much he loved to, push the boundaries, I bet he'd be tackling some of the, the biggest challenges we're facing.
Right. Like maybe he'd be revolutionizing healthcare.
Oh, yeah.
Trying to make it more affordable and accessible for everyone.
Makes sense. Or maybe he'd be focused on renewable energy.
Yeah.
Trying to, get us off fossil fuels.
Totally. He was always, concerned about the environment.
Definitely. But knowing how much he loved technology, I could also see him, diving into AI.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Exploring, what it could do, how to solve problems with it.
He would have had some strong opinions about AI.
Absolutely.
About the good and the bad.
It's too bad. We'll never know, what he would have thought.
Yeah, it is a loss.
Yeah.
But I think, in a way, his legacy is like a challenge to us to think differently, to embrace innovation, and to try to find solutions that help everyone. Hearing about his life and how he just never gave up on excellence. It makes me think about, my own work and what I'm passionate about. Have you ever felt that kind of inspiration from Jobs' story?
Definitely. His story reminds us that even when things get tough, we can choose to keep going, to learn from our mistakes, and to keep pushing towards our goals.
Well said. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the life of Steve Jobs, I hope you're leaving with, a sense of curiosity and maybe even a little bit of inspiration. We've just scratched the surface here, but hopefully this has given you a better understanding of, the man behind the myth.
He was a complicated guy for sure, full of contradictions. But there's no doubt that he had a huge impact on the world. And his story still resonates with us today because it speaks to something, something we all share, that desire to create, to innovate, to leave our mark on the world.
So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and don't be afraid to challenge the status quo. Who knows? Maybe you'll be the one to come up with the next big world-changing idea. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.